Good feedback is one of the single most important things you will be doing as a manager. Today, we're going to look at the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and it's going to walk us through exactly how to make sure that our feedback connects to the person we're talking to instead of being a little bit too soft or missing the mark, dancing around the issue, or being obnoxiously aggressive and turning into a weapon. All of these are common pitfalls. We're going to dig into it and start giving really useful feedback. So in today's video, we're going to look at all the different topics in this book, and I really recommend you get this book for yourself as well and read through it on your own. There's a link for that down in the description, as well as check out many of the extended resources on the website, the blog, and just follow along in general. You can really upgrade your feedback game. Now, the first thing that happens when you read this book, and I recommend you read the new edition of the book, not the old one. I think Kim's a little bit traumatized by how people have abused the name of this book. You see, they've taken the word radical, which means new, and for some reason, they've said, oh, yeah, that means move fast and break stuff, right? And so they've turned into jerks. And they said, well, I'm going to just tell it like it is and shout it out and be a jerk and not care about feelings. Feelings get in the way of feedback. And they're doing this under the banner of the name Radical Candor, which is really upsetting because Kim wants you to understand radical to mean new, a new way to be candid with people that cares a lot about the person you're talking to and still gives you the clarity of the message to make sure that that feedback really lands. So there's a lot of misunderstanding around this name. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who think Radical Candor is a book that gives them license to be a jerk. And that's exactly what we're getting rid of, right? It is not a license to be a jerk. It's actually tools to help you avoid that and be very good at giving feedback. And one of the best ways Kim says to clarify this myth is to use this compass rose here. So we have two dimensions. We have care personally and challenge directly. And that's our gold standard for feedback, right? Radical candor is when you care personally about what you're saying to the person you're saying it to, and you're challenging directly on what the problem is. If you're not doing it directly, it's ruinous empathy. We'll discuss what that is. Obnoxious aggression is when you don't care personally and you're just blurting out the facts. And then manipulative insincerity, and we're also going to talk about that. So ruinous empathy is when you're so fixed on not hurting feelings that you won't tell somebody something that they need to know. And there's a lot of reasons why people can get into a situation where they have ruinous empathy. They might think this person has, been going through a rough patch. They're not prepared to hear what I need to tell them. You might not know how to deliver your message correctly. You might not have the courage to actually say something, right? The feelings you're protecting are not their feelings. They're your own feelings. There's a lot of things in there. When you don't challenge directly, it's on this side of the table. And there's another one here, which is obnoxious aggression. So obnoxious aggression is really when you've taken away all that personal care from the equation and said, I'm just going to say whatever I want. It's a direct challenge, which is good, but you're at the same time showing somebody you really don't care about them at all. This is a big problem because you erode trust in an organization. You make sure that that feedback actually has less chance of being successful. So you wasted both time of the person giving the feedback and the person who's meant to receive that feedback. So you wasted the time of both yourself giving that feedback as well as the person meant to receive that feedback. You've both wasted time and effort. You've eroded trust, so you're less likely to listen next time. In general, it's just a negative sum game. Every time you make this move, you generally destroy the organization, which has a whole bunch of other knock-on effects, which we talk about elsewhere in this channel. And you know that eroding trust in an organization is actually a really good way to guarantee your organization crawls at value delivery instead of running. So don't do that. Remember, radical candor revokes the license to be a jerk. And then this last quadrant here is manipulative insincerity. And that's when you get this non-specific or insincere praise, such as, hey, everyone, good job in general. It's not specific. Or with an undercurrent of being insincere. So like, oh yeah, good job. Right? This is insincere, or it's unclear and it's unkind, such as, I expected somebody of your skill to have already been able to do this work, right? It's unkind and unclear about what the problem is. So that's the major components to this system here. And so it kind of comes into a few things in the book. First, a lot revolves around this compass rose. I think that's the core concept of the book. And it's underpinned by a philosophy of what you need to be doing in your organization and in your work and how you relate to others. And then it's augmented with a whole set of tools and techniques that you can use in daily practice. And so a lot of that philosophy is stuff like bringing your whole self to work, open communication, understanding motivations, and collaboration. And we're going to look at all of those. And then tools and techniques, such as establishing trust, including ways to establish trust, encourage feedback, avoid burnout and boredom, and how to do stuff together. All of these things are important, and Kim kind of weaves it together to explain to you how you bring that whole thing together. And there's a little bit of an element throughout this, which is you're building an ecosystem for good feedback. It's not a single tick box exercise. It's not a single thing you can do standalone, one off. It's a whole ecosystem you have to nurture and mature in your organization. But you can also do a bunch of things to introduce it and operationalize that. And we'll get into that at the end as well. So first, let's take a look at the philosophy, bringing your whole self to work. First thing is that being a boss is exhausting, and except for a very, very small number of bosses who shouldn't be a boss in the first place, I think, it's going to be hard work. It's emotionally draining, it's exhausting work. You need to make sure that your batteries are charged enough that you can actually do this work. If it's not, if you're not taking care of yourself first, you're not going to be able to bring yourself to work, and you're not going to be able to give people the feedback they need to get the way they need to get it. The second thing is, and this is a hard learning curve for a lot of new managers, bosses are not there to do the work. They're there to guide people to do the work, right? When you do that other thing, when you say, I'm going to micromanage you, everybody gets annoyed. Kim also warns us that keeping things professional, which is a very common mindset, it's a bit of a trap. And keeping things professional means we're going to create some social coldness and distance and be a bit of an aloof manager who can't really talk to the troops and form bonds with them. Maybe that worked really well in a colonial army. Not in a knowledge working modern era environment. And I think the thing that kind of caps that all together is that relationships are the fundamental essence of being able to give good feedback. If the relationships are missing, you will have a very difficult time giving radical candor. So I think that's the whole thing. Bring your whole self to work. Make sure your batteries are charged. Remember, your job is to guide people to do the work the best they can. And make sure you get to know people and maintain healthy relationships with them. And so the next pillar of philosophy here is around open communication. And what Kim's kind of pointing out here is that we have to operationalize feedback by caring personally and confronting the situation at the same time. And if you think about that from the other side of the equation, if you're giving cruel feedback, you're not really using a tool to help your people grow. You have a weapon in your hand and you're just kind of doing damage to your own organization. This is something you really need to be careful of as a manager, is how much damage are you doing to your company with cruel and unusual feedback? Because you're going to hurt yourself the most because you depend on all those people. One of the things that inhibits good communication of feedback is when you personalize that feedback and you make it into a personal attack. And so there's a whole bunch of advice inside this book, and I can't get into all of it today, but you should not personalize the feedback, right? Instead of saying, for instance, you are bad, say, hey, this work, and then go into specifics about what is missing in the work. Don't just say the work is bad in general, but also don't make it about the person. Make it about the work. Make it about the facts. Make it about the results. Just explain the situation. Don't personalize the work. Make it about the work. Make it about the facts. Make it about the situation going on. Make it about behaviors, but don't personalize the feedback. And this is one that really gets a lot of managers, especially ones who have a lot of tenure, maybe not seniority, but they've been in the job for a very long time, is they like to label people. I've seen managers, directors, etc., who have been in that kind of role for decades label people of, this person's a lazy bones. This person's not good. They're not very smart. They over polish everything. And when you apply these labels, you are creating a situation where it's harder for you to challenge directly and care personally about the kind of feedback that needs to be delivered. So avoid labeling people. And a big one here is articulate why. Right? We need to explain these things. I think the most frustrating feedback I've ever received is something like, this isn't good. And then the person walks away and they don't explain further. I've had code reviews where somebody highlights a good section of code and just says this, and I don't know what's wrong with it, right? Like what is wrong here? It's just not good feedback. When you don't explain why, you're almost running away from the details that you need to be communicating. Explain why. Get into the details and make it very concrete. Kim Scott in the book says you should think about this open communication thing like talking to somebody who has spinach in their teeth. If you see somebody, let's say you see your friend or a family member going up to some sort of event to speak and they have some spinach in their teeth, you don't stand there, you don't stand on the podium and say, hey, everybody, look at this. This dummy's got spinach in their teeth. You don't do that. You don't ignore it either, and you don't let them continue the whole time. You say, hey, you got a little something right here. Takes about 3 seconds, right? It's easy. Hey, you have some spinach in your teeth. Maybe pick it out before you go up and deliver that speech at the wedding. Something like this, right? And the next part of the philosophy here is that it's actually really critical that you understand the motivations of the people you're working with. And when the motivations are clear and understood, you can help make the work more meaningful, which means the feedback becomes more meaningful because you attach everything to something that somebody cares about, they're motivated by. So if you can attach it to something that they care about, it's more likely that your feedback becomes effective. And one of the biggest traps, like this really is a big trap for managers, so please take this to heart. You cannot take the thing that motivates you in your brain, extract it and plug it into somebody else's brain like a USB stick and say, you have the same motivation I do. The same motivators are the same things that motivate me, motivate you now. You do not install a motivation into another human being. And the story that Kim likes to tell is you talk to 3 bricklayers and you say, okay, well, first bricklayer, what are you doing? And they say, well, I'm working. Second bricklayer, what are you doing? Say, okay, I'm making a wall. Third bricklayer, what are you doing? They say, look up. And they're building a cathedral. They might have even been on the same job site, but their motivations are very different. You need to work within their motivations, not say, I care a lot about this thing. I'm going to install it in you. And I see this all the time, especially with founders, especially with executives trying to inspire a team. It's fine to share what inspires you, but when you're giving feedback, you have to attach it to something that people care about. And one way to think about this is you want a partnership. That's what you're aiming for here, right? You want a partnership, like a first-class partnership with somebody, especially when you're giving them feedback. It doesn't mean, somebody's working in my company, they've lost all their autonomy and personhood and their own individual ambitions. They absorb mine because I'm the leader. This is a very bad mindset to have and one that prevents feedback from getting through all the time because you don't care personally about that person. You care about yourself. So flip that around, care personally, talk to somebody about the stuff they care about, help them. And as an almost extension of that, collaboration is quite important. Telling people what to do does not work. And Kim really likes to talk a lot about Steve Jobs through this whole part of the book and routinely explains Steve Jobs was not telling people what to do. One of the things that made him so successful was he taught people to dream for some larger outcome. He wasn't assigning them tasks. He didn't say, you build the turn knob in the iPod. You build the headphone adapter. This is not what Steve Jobs did. He taught them to dream of something larger and cohesive that pulled them in the same direction. So we have to collaborate, and that means you have to inspire people with their own motivations. We can't inspire people with our motivations. And one of the ways we need to do that is by creating a culture of listening. It's not easy to do because it's not just about you. It's actually about everyone around you, but it can start with you. Where do you start with that is you need to find your own unique way to listen. And what does that actually mean? It doesn't mean you listen to somebody talking to you, like this is hearing somebody talk. I heard you say something, but listening is a little bit more active, right? And listening, you're almost creating an environment where you partner with people and you work through and help guide them towards their solutions by listening with them. You're not giving them directions, but you are listening to what they say and helping guide their thinking, helping bring clarity to their own thinking. You're not micromanaging them, but you are an active participant in helping them bring clarity to their own problems. Instead of, I think you've probably heard this management anti-pattern, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. Nobody likes working for this person, and there's a reason, because they're not a partner in anything you're doing. So the feedback really can't connect and growth is limited. It all ties together, right? And bringing that back to listening for a minute, some people do this in very different ways, right? They have different styles. Some people like to be very loud at the beginning of a conversation to provoke a lot of opinions. And then some people like to be very quiet and speak at the end of the meeting. I think that was Jeff Bezos. He likes to say, I like to speak at the end of the meeting. It doesn't mean have the last word. He means let everybody discuss first. Bezos gets to do that because, and only because, he spent a ton of effort making absolutely certain he had a culture that had hard debates, where he got to increase that culture at the end. If you're missing that, you can enter into a whole bunch of problems, such as everybody in the room trying to preempt, this is the thing the boss is going to want to hear, so I should say it, just saying a bunch of safe things. Or even worse, it can look like the boss doesn't even really care about these problems, so why should I care? You have to find out what type of listening works in your organization with the people you need to listen to. And it's going to be different. You're going to have to work on it. It's not going to be overnight. One more important aspect here for collaboration is you need to seek facts, not a suite of opinions or faith in personalities. You need to seek facts, right? So if somebody says, oh, this problem keeps coming up all the time, say, okay, let's talk about the facts of this problem, not talk about, I have a feeling that it's like this because it's bad and it's not very popular. And this person's always talking nonsense. We can't trust them. And this is nonsense, right? We have to actually look for the facts. And when you're not disciplined at it and you haven't built your internal discipline to seek facts over everything else, it's almost hard to do this work. But you have to push through. You have to get this done. Do not just default to, the highest paid person's opinion or the loudest person's opinion or the most aggressive person's opinion or the person who's maintaining that system or whatever it is. You seek the facts. This is one way to build a healthy debate culture. On top of that, right? So show your work, right? Just explain the work. So all these things come together and kind of create that collaborative culture. And sometimes you get somebody who's really smart and they end up getting promoted to a leadership role because they are so smart at something. They end up having the hardest time with this point here. Being right is not the same thing as coming up with the right ideas. And this is something that can be just a really typical challenge for somebody who's spent their whole career being celebrated for being the person who came up with the right idea, to get over and say, it doesn't matter who came up with the idea. I want to collect good ideas from other people, not be the person who forced my idea on everyone else. All these things, right? This is a set of things that create an environment where you can have collaboration, and this collaboration unlocks part of a good feedback culture. Okay, so all of that was part one. Now we're going to get into part two. Part two of the book was discussing these tools and techniques, and they're kind of categorized in these 4 parts. I actually think there's like 5 parts that should be in here. It's a little bit too much for 4 parts, but there's tools and techniques in the book, and we're going to walk through a number of them together, and we're going to find out how do you establish trust, encourage feedback, avoid boredom and burnout, and doing stuff together. How do you do stuff together? And there's a nice overlap there with the philosophy as well. It all ties together, like I said. And one of the first things is you need to relinquish unilateral authority. And this, I think, is a challenge for a lot of people who are moving from a position where they had all the authority and now they need to get rid of their authority. And this one is quite often a challenge, even with people who are excited to remove their authority and want to get rid of it. They have a hard time making that jump and getting that job done, but it's important. And the reason it's important here is different for the reason it's important in a lot of other things, like how do I delegate properly? How do I create a collaborative culture? Like all that stuff's cool, but it actually has a very specific purpose in Radical Candor, which is the relationship building is blocked when you try to do a unilateral authority. It's harder to build a relationship when you have that unilateral authority. And because it's hard to build a relationship, it's hard to do that care personally side. So establishing trust is hampered. Like I say, it's all tied together, but this is one of those things where it belongs to all those other things, but it belongs to this one as well for just a very different reason, but it's also cohesive with all those other methods. It's always interesting to see this one pop up in pretty much every management book, every management technique that talks about flow, about moving things fast. We're constantly talking about pushing authority into teams and sharing authority, distributing authority, getting rid of, single dictator in the organization. And so one of the other things here is trust is built with a constant pattern of acting in good faith. So you need to establish your track record. If you are coming in as a new manager, you're starting at zero. Nobody knows you. It's going to take time to build that trust. And so you need to start. You need to start delivering that feedback early, and you have to make sure you're showing them, I care personally. This is a direct challenge. I care about you. Here it is. And this one can be a bit of a challenge as well, as figure out what people value. And remember, we talked about that in the philosophy half of the book as well, but it shows up here again as a tool as well, which is figure out what people value. In fact, it's such an important one, it's going to come up again in one of the other sections. And Kim actually introduces something which I never heard before until I read this book, which was called the Platinum Rule, which is an interesting upgrade to the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Platinum Rule goes a little bit more introspective on that and says, figure out what the other person is comfortable with and do that. And she was talking about this in the context of, physical touch with other people. Why is it that for some people giving a hug is empathetic and with other people it's creepy and gross and please don't do that? It's a good way to look through that problem space. Again, read the book for more detail on that, but the Platinum Rule, right? Figure out what the other person is comfortable with and do that thing. And there's some very powerful imagery in this book as well about somebody being crushed by a rock and explaining the difference between empathy and compassion, saying, okay, somebody's crushed with a rock. And empathy is kind of like, oh, wow, I really feel for you. You're crushed by that rock. I can emote with you and I have an outpouring of feelings. And this is not so useful. What's better is compassion, which is, oh, I can see you're suffering. Let me push that rock off of you instead of just being trapped by my own empathy and frozen. I think you need some empathy, you need some sympathy to do this maneuver, but you need to go beyond, you need to take it to compassion. And so this is that care personally is a compassionate side of thing. I think somewhere in the book, Kim even says she wanted to call the book Compassionate Candor. So she went with Radical Candor to appeal to an audience that might be put off by that kind of vocabulary. Remember, compassion is more important than empathy. Don't stop at empathy, go all the way to compassion. So Kim also says we should be encouraging feedback. So how do you encourage feedback? And in fact, how do you even know you're doing feedback correctly? So Kim came up with this really useful report card, and I think you can use this after your next one-on-one, you can use it this week, just use it. And it's an interesting idea because you get to measure yourself and say, am I giving, and encouraging praise? Am I giving, and encouraging criticism? And you can even use this with other people in your organization to help give them feedback about their own feedback culture. It's like, hey, Bob, I notice you're not encouraging criticism. I notice you're not giving criticism, right? You can also use this tool as a leader of leaders to help encourage that. And let's look at that a little bit more in detail, right? To encourage getting feedback, first ask for feedback, right? Just ask. In fact, you should ask before you give feedback, right? You should actually ask for the feedback before you give feedback as a best practice, and ask with specificity, right? So one of the problems with a lot of leaders asking for feedback is, hey, do you have any feedback for me? What Kim suggests is a very specific approach, which just it's easy and it makes perfect sense. It's, hey, person I manage, here's where I want your help. I notice I have these spaces to improve. Can you help me with that? I want feedback on these things. Can you walk me through with that? I notice this thing. Help me. Make it specific, because now it's on the table. Now it's not a surprise. Now it's even drawing somebody in, saying there's no hidden trap here. We both know it's a problem. It's unlikely that there's going to be some big consequences for you telling me it's a problem when I just told you it's a problem. So as a leader, you should really be vulnerable and seek discomfort. Ask regularly. So, if you're not asking for feedback every 2 weeks from people on one-on-ones, if you're not doing these things, something's not quite right. Sometimes you'll see that people are kind of shy or not really buying in, and their words don't match what you read on their emotions, or the way they say something sounds like there's a hidden meaning there, or they're just kind of playing along. Ask, dig, push a little bit, and just say, hey, I notice these two things are incongruent. You're saying yes, but I'm sensing there's something bigger going on. Help me understand that bigger thing. Help me understand that hidden topic. This doesn't have to be complicated stuff. And something else to encourage feedback, right? So to encourage getting feedback, visibly celebrate and reward good criticisms and also good praise. Measure how often you receive criticism, right? Just keep a little piece of paper on your desk or a spreadsheet or something. Keep a mental tally. Just keep track. How often are you actually having people speak up to you, challenge you on topics? If you're never getting any criticism, you are in one of the most dangerous situations you can be in as a leader. You have to fix that right now. And so then let's talk about giving feedback, right? So giving feedback, some good practices around that. First of all, ask permission to give feedback. Like, hey, I want to give you some feedback. Is that okay? Like just some short hints on something I noticed. I want to just talk about that. Is that okay? Remember, clarity of feedback is at the ear, not the mouth. And I know that sounds a little bit hokey, but I found it quite easy to remember. And the point is, you can give the feedback, but if it's not received correctly, you didn't really give the feedback, right? It's like throwing a ball to somebody and they didn't catch it. Did they really catch the ball? No, you just kind of threw a ball at them. Make sure, again, you don't label stuff with snap judgments like, this is bad or you're bad. Explain how. And I think one of the best tools for that, I don't think it was explained in the book, but this situation, behavior, impact, this is the situation. We were all working on this important project that needed to go to customers. Behavior was, instead of interacting with the customer, you went and spent most of the time talking to our own people. And the impact is we have to do a follow-up meeting to find out a bunch of things that we didn't know about before. But it also helps, you need to connect that to them personally, right? It's like, why does that matter to you personally? So here's what that's kind of holding you back from. Here's how that relates to how people understand you. Here's how that relates to your goals in your career, in your work, in your life, the things that motivate you. You have to tie those two together. Something here that I found actually very powerful, especially for leaders who suddenly found themselves a little bit too busy and afraid to give feedback because they're worried they're going to have to be the one to train and up-level everyone on things that they're not quite performing on, is sometimes feedback will be withheld because they know they can't act on it. And a counter to that is really still deliver the feedbacks, care personally, challenge directly. But if they need some coaching or some learning on how to do that, you can also partner them with somebody that you can find and say, hey, this person knows these topics really well. I want you to learn from them. And this still allows them to grow. It still allows you to be authentic, still allows you to have the conversations you need to have. And then there's another one here, which is some feedback is personal and it should be private. And you're going to have to use your own judgment for this to figure out when those situations are. But be careful that you're not giving something that is private or could embarrass someone in public when it should be private information. Or maybe even make sure you talk to people about things privately first before you go and put that on stage. Make sure you present it in a way that other people can learn from, but is not going to harm the other person, or even allow them to deliver the message if it needs to be a learning for the whole company in that moment, such as a production incident where you delete the entire customer database, or you're a sales manager and you goof up and you lose the big account or something like this. Have that private conversation, find a way to have that bigger conversation with the whole company. Those can be multiple conversations, but make sure you're not just shouting at somebody in public on things that should be private. And there were three kind of good practices that jumped out at me in this section of the book, which was do not proxy feedback, make people talk to each other. And you can see this a lot where it's like two different employees, and I've seen this so much, two different employees are having a debate and employee one goes to the manager or the lead or somebody and says, I have a problem with this person. That manager has to proxy that information over to the other party. Then that person responds through this person, and just this person is a weird negotiation between the two. Make those two people talk to each other, or make them talk to each other in the same room. Maybe you're there to broker the conversation, but you're not there to be monkey in the middle, right? You need to set your own boundaries and say, this is outside of what I'm doing. You need to have that conversation with this person. I will help you have that conversation with this person, but you have to have that conversation with this person. Another important practice, and this is probably something that so many companies are messing up, is keeping your development conversations, right? Career development. I'm going to help you develop your skills. I'm going to help you do better. Keep that different from the rating conversations. Here's how good you are at your job. Here's what kind of pay you deserve to get. You mix those two together and suddenly nothing works. And we all see it all the time. It's so tempting to say, we're only going to run one feedback process and everything's going to be fine. And then it's not fine. And all the feedback is worthless. Don't do that. This is the simplest thing you can do to not mess up your company, is keep those two things separate. And then the last good practice here is to really talk about the future of what that means. right? What does this feedback mean for the future? It doesn't mean, hey, for next time, do better. It means as you're working towards this promotion, as you're working towards this upcoming project you're on, as you're working towards this thing you care about, maybe there's values you care about, such as being well understood by people, and say next time when you're on a project like this, people will be able to understand you better. Focus on the future with that feedback. Don't say, this was bad, here's why it's bad, and that one in the past was bad, and the one before it was bad as well, and the one before that. Don't do this, right? You're not there to make a list of somebody's mistakes and replay it to them. You're there to help them get better, not live in regret. And so then there's this other third section to tools and techniques, which is avoiding boredom and burnout. And this is talking about getting to know people personally. So there's a lot of ways to do this. And Kim suggests 3 kind of stories that you should find out from everybody that you're going to give feedback to, which is like, what's your life story? How did you get here? And the second one here is, find out what motivates somebody. And I found a lot of people, to my surprise, had a hard time figuring out what motivates people, trying to find personality studies and psychology and all these tricks. Just first thing, like honestly, just my personal advice, directly ask somebody, like, what motivates you? What are your motivations? What are you excited about? They might not be perfect. They might be trying to tell you things that they think their boss wants to hear, but that's also part of building trust with somebody. Maybe you can ask this question again and again over time as you get to know somebody and keep track of that and understand, this is somebody I regularly give feedback to. I need to make sure that that stuff that I need to tell them is connected to their motivations, so it's meaningful to them and not just noise that's irrelevant to stuff that they don't really care about. And then there's a third story that Kim says you should understand, which is, what are your big dreams in life? And this is another type of motivation, in my opinion, but it's also a good story to get out of somebody. And actually, all 3 of those are really good just for relationship building in general with your colleagues. Even if you're never going to give feedback to those people, I guarantee you'll have rich conversations that are enjoyable just by having those conversations with people. Outside of that, Kim says you should really work on a yearly growth plan and build that thing together, right? So it's like, okay, here's where you are. Here's where you need to grow. We built it together. Here's what it is. The next year of your growth looks like focusing in on these areas. And that really opens the door for, I care about you because we did it together collaboratively, right? Think about the philosophy section from before. It's very direct, right? It's talking about the stuff that needs to be talked about. And one last hint here is saying thank you and showing personal gratitude. And this one might sound a little bit silly and say, well, people should just have strong resolve and understand that their work is thanked. But it's just a little bit of very easy things to do like that make the place easier to work in, higher trust, people feel more respected in general. Just constantly reminding people you appreciate the work they do when they do good work. That makes it so much easier to say, yep, I trust this person, and when they tell me something, I should listen to them because they have my best interests in heart. And Kim has this other interesting slide here which says, the ideal goal for you as a manager is to become, as a manager or a leader or a boss of some sort, is to become a thought partner when you're involved in your employees' work, right? You don't want to be the micromanager. You don't want to be an absentee manager who's never there. You want to be somewhere in the middle, guiding them, helping them think better. Doesn't mean you micromanage, and it doesn't mean you're not there, right? This hire good people and get out of their way, which sounds good. In fact, you should be out of their way. If you're in their way, it's a problem. But a lot of people understand that to be run away, never be there. This is wrong. And then micromanager is hire good people and think for them. It's just absolutely foolish, right? Or either you're either hiring people you shouldn't have hired, or you shouldn't have hired them in the first place because you're doing all the work, because you're fighting with them trying to do a job that you hired them to do. It's just foolishness. You want to be in the middle and you want to help people think through things and keep them aligned. It's a fantastic way to think about this, is somewhere in the middle of those two. And that is guidance. That is caring personally. That is direct feedback, but it's not doing the work and it's not running away. I find some interesting parallels here with the situational leadership model 2, which I plan to talk about one day on our channel as well. And it's just a very interesting way to think about this. And so the last part of tools and techniques here is a discussion on how to do stuff together. And Kim writes a lot of really good information here about how do you do a one-on-one correctly. And she lays out just these these important things to check off and make sure they exist. If they don't exist, you probably don't have a great one-on-one, right? Make sure you have a good mindset, make them regular. Make sure you have a good mindset that's focused on giving radical candor in the first place, collaborative, partnership. If that's not present when you go into the meeting, things are already off. Like you should really fix the mindset before you go into that meeting. Make sure they're regular, right? These need to happen pretty regularly. I like to run mine once a week. Some people do every 2 weeks. I find once a month is pretty strange. And I found a lot of people, they misunderstand the one-on-one to think it's about assigning the work and saying, well, somebody's very senior, they don't need it. The one-on-one is there regularly to make sure you have a channel to build a relationship with somebody. If that relationship is missing, you will not have the amount of trust to care personally when you need to give some very important feedback to somebody. It's going to be missing, it's going to break down, it's going to feel obnoxious, or you're going to be pulling punches when you need to really say something important. And so that goes into the other point there. Don't skip those conversations either, right? So if it's, hey, I have a busy meeting this week, it might be even better for you to cancel something else in order to have that one-on-one and ground those conversations, right? Make sure that you have something that's a career conversation included. Show that you listen. And remember, everyone has to find their own unique way to listen and to make it authentic and make it their own. But you need to show that you're listening so the other person understands this person's in it. They care personally about me. The things that I say have some consequence here, and help them clarify their own ideas. And that's a great mode to be in for coaching and development of people, especially on topics where they need to improve, is figure out why they got into that state and just help them clarify what's going on. Help them clarify that in the context of the direct challenge and the caring personally and things they care about, things that motivate them. If that's not there, you're going to have a hard time being successful about giving that feedback. And so that's kind of the model that I think the book presents for us, right? Is this compass rose of caring personally and challenging directly, a baseline of philosophy that supports everything, and then tools and techniques that augment that help you get those practices implemented. Now, the book has a section afterwards which talks a little bit about how do I operationalize radical candor? And operationalizing just means getting that stuff into the company, into the culture, and just working, just part of the way things work. It's a little bit tricky because people like to think about processes like this and say, oh yeah, it's just hire some consultants, bring them in, they do a tutorial, and like we're done. This is not, you can do that. It's actually probably going to help speed up everyone's understanding, get some skills developments in place. But if it's not a continuous practice that's encouraged by top leadership, it's going to be a challenge. Here's some hints that I've extracted from the book about how to operationalize radical candor. First, explain how it works to your team. And I think that one's pretty straightforward. Like, get everyone the book, maybe do a training session with them, some workshops. Second one there is be self-aware of who you present yourself as when you talk. So make sure that you look like somebody who cares personally and challenges directly. Like, buy yourself the credibility. And something interesting about that buying of credibility ties into this next point, which is a bit of a practice around storytelling. There's also storytelling and role playing. And so storytelling radical candor moments from your own history. So, hey, I once was working on a software project where the developers were building things incorrectly. And I was more concerned with my own goals than the goals of my peers inside of the team. Even though I was the tech lead of the team and I was working on this thing, I was more concerned with saying, look, I'm the boss. This is my decision. We have to do it this way in order for the customer to be most successful. And that escalated to that developer getting so upset. They called in sick the next 2 days because they poured their heart and soul into this project and they were shut down by me, and I didn't even listen to them as an individual. I just said cold hard, no, you've done this the wrong way. We have to fix it. We have to fix that system. Had I gone in and said, hey, let me put this through the lens of something relevant to you, something where it's clear that I care about you personally, it's not just obnoxiously aggressive, it's unlikely that would have been the outcome. Right? So storytelling that stuff from your own history helps people understand and connect those dots. So maybe even today, curate 3 stories from yourself where you've had moments, because radical candor is not a personality test, right? It's we all drift across that compass from time to time and end up giving feedback that drifts into each different category. And the idea is, let's give the majority of our feedback in radical candor and avoid those other danger zones. But we're all going to slip into those areas. Collect those stories and make sure you can tell them to other people. And some people are afraid that this will make them look weak, but actually this can be a really good way to build credibility in your organization and see you as, wow, this is a leader who's actually really dedicated to growing people and not afraid. And that is a fantastic attribute to have as a leader, which most subscribers on this channel probably have some interest in being. And so you can also do that as well, not just with storytelling from your own past. You can also do active role play sessions. You can also do down here this feedback triangle, which is a very interesting practice where you have two people giving feedback in a normal setting with a third person almost playing feedback referee. You're not interjecting in the content of what they're saying, but you are making sure that the rules of radical candor are applied, escalating them to care personally, escalating them to challenge directly, making it the most compassionate form and the most direct form of feedback possible, rooted in something somebody cares about. So having that third party in there helps everybody learn together. And you can even do that together, switch roles. It's almost a workshop that runs itself. So you can also seek criticism and give out radical candor regularly, right? So if you're not constantly seeking out radical candor as a leader, you're not doing your job to really make sure radical candor is installed into your company, right? You have to keep pushing this. It's not enough. It's not something you can bring in a few consultants and say, we're done. You have to keep pushing. Something else is actually make sure it's clear that the feedback given is meaningful and doesn't go into the void. Share what happened in public with that feedback. It's like, hey, we received this feedback, or I received this feedback. Here's how that played out. Here's what that's resulted in. And that's not going to be for everything, right? We're probably going to get more feedback than things we can action, which is actually a good situation to be in, better than the other one. And even explain certain things like there's other feedback that just takes more time to action and it will take some time to see results, and just explain what that is, explain why it's going to take some time. And for me, the one that really underpins everything is embrace discomfort. If your leadership group is not embracing the discomfort of the directness of caring personally, which is kind of funny that that should be uncomfortable. It should almost be uncomfortable to not care and not be direct. But for some reason, like most people just aren't built that way. And so embrace the discomfort of doing all this stuff. And if you do that, you're actually going to be in a more humane organization. So you want to really check off all that stuff from your list, make sure it's done. And if you are good at this and you're repeating it regularly, you will be installing radical candor feedback into your organization. Okay, so that's it for the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I hope you enjoyed today's video. We threw our license to be a jerk into the trash can. I hope the rest of you did as well. I hope you learned some interesting things as well. Please go and get a copy of the book if you haven't already. There's a link down in the description, as well as a link to the website blog, which contains just lots and lots of really great information, way beyond what's in the book. And I hope you're all giving great feedback. If you have feedback, please leave it below in the comments. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.